Welcome back to the Shuffle Dating Podcast. I'm Andy, your host, co-founder of Shuffle, and I'm here with Elise, matchmaker extraordinaire. Elise, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Elise Braunschweiger. I am an established matchmaker and date coach. I got started in my career in matchmaking a couple years ago when I was hired by an agency out of New York City called Macklin. And I worked with them for a few years, had a really exciting career matchmaking through them, and was eventually promoted to their head of matchmaking, which was super cool. I got to oversee their US team and kind of help all of them do their best job in matchmaking those clients and delivering an exceptional service. And after lots of time and consideration, and in part with the support of the founder and the CEO, Rachel Macklin, I have stepped out and launched my own date coaching and matchmaking service. And so I'm super excited to be here. I love talking about dating. It's this part of our lives that affects so many other aspects of who we are and our well-being. And I'm always keen to help people figure out ways to optimize that and make it not just more efficient, but like more enjoyable.
And why have I never heard of Macklin before?
That is such a good question. And it fascinates me because I think there's like this whole world of matchmaking that exists. And so many people don't know it's there. So many people don't know that it's an accessible option to them. I do think that some of that might be that there's a cost barrier for a lot of people. So, the market that would maybe use a dating app it's not going to be that all of those people would be a good fit for matchmaking. And depending on the matchmaking service, they can have kind of a hefty price tag depending on who you work with and what your search looks like. Because the reality is you're outsourcing all of the time that it takes for you to go on a dating app and not just find a match, but then actually vet them. So matchmakers will meet that person face to face, they'll check their ID, they'll put them through like an interview process. And so I think the reason you haven't heard of it is because it's probably a little bit more expensive. There's an exclusivity to it where it's not really a fit for everybody. And yeah, I think it's also having a little bit of a revolution, like a little bit of a renaissance, because what matchmaking used to be, when you think of like Indian matchmaking or even like Jewish matchmaking, like the idea of like a mensch or, like those things are being kind of modernized in this really secular way. And so, yeah, it's a service that people really need, but so many people don't know is accessible.
Right. I guess it makes sense. It's not like a consumer brand because it's not like Tinder for the masses. And so I guess the point is kind of, you want it to feel personal as opposed to a Coca-Cola.
Yes, yeah. And they do, I mean, Macklin only probably works with like somewhere between 100 and 150 clients a year, and that's across all three offices. They do have something like 13,000 people in their database, but these are people who've been like really hand selected over 11 years. So it is a smaller pool, it is not a huge group of people that they're working with, but it is a much more bespoke process.
Okay. How did you get into this again? What was your, like, maybe some formative experiences that you feel led you down this fascinating career?
Matchmaking was something that I truly like fell over backwards into. I was working in a client-facing role in finance, so nothing remotely close to what I was doing professionally prior to when I took the job with Macklin. I was going through kind of like a personal big transition where I like broke off an engagement. I quit my job. I got rid of like I had a house at the time. I like signed off my mortgage and then got hired by Macklin. And I think this really interesting thing happened with both my personal and my professional life where I was learning so much about what it means to choose the right person for you and what it means to be with the right partner. And so not only was I exploring that in my own dating, but I was, I got this new job I had like a bachelor's in psychology and client facing work. That's all I needed to get in the door. And they liked me. And yeah, and then I just realized I was good at it, because you just need to be good with people. You need to like people and you need to have sort of an empathetic ear. And those are definitely two things I've got, if nothing else. So I think it was really just kind of like finding myself in this really niche industry that just happened to cater to the things that I was good at and that I was interested in.
Yeah. It's interesting though. I feel like there's some amount of obviously all the things you said, being good with people, but there's also some like systematic component which
Mm.
tickles my nerd brain, where matchmaking is like a math problem in many ways, and you're trying to like optimize these constraints, and it seems like you have a good grasp of how like systems work. It's interesting. What else have you learned? I mean, in this journey, maybe for yourself personally, or just stuff you
Yeah.
didn't really realize as you dove into this that now looking back, you're like, huh,
Oh, there's so much I could
surprising.
say. Yeah, there's so much I could say about that. I think um, one of the common tropes that we see as matchmakers is we tend to work with people who in every other aspect of their lives, they've been really, really successful. So these are titans of industry, people who've had excellent careers that they're really passionate about. And then there's this one area of life that they just cannot seem to problem solve. They just can't seem to figure it out. And it really gets to them. It really, I think it's confusing for them because so many other things have been achievable for them. And what that really comes down to is that they're really not applying the same strategic analytical framework that they would to any other sort of goal achievement that they are to dating. And so I think one thing that is probably intuitive to most of us, but in matchmaking you see so upfront, is just that people really are kind of shooting from the hip. Like they're just doing where they're kind of going where their emotion takes them. And very rarely do we see people who intuitively are thinking about dating in sort of this analytical, intentional way. And so it's not just, was she really hot and should I see her again? It's like, was she actually someone who like I could see myself living like a really healthy, happy life with? And, I've got all of this family in the city that we're living in, but actually she said that she's thinking she might move back to LA. And people don't walk themselves through those things. Instead, they're just like, yeah, it was a hot date. Definitely going to do that. And then, all of a sudden they're heartbroken. And I think it's just about having, what one thing matchmaking and date coaching do is it brings in an objective third party to just provide some perspective and give you a chance to analyze, is the way that I'm approaching this, is the way that I'm thinking about this really serving me and getting me to where I want to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. At least I have to bring up something that others on my team have commented on so
Love.
far. So far, our guests have largely been women, and
Yeah.
people tell me, Andy, as an interviewer, you're talking too much about guy problems. And so, as
Hmm.
you gave this example of, and then the people on my team who have also said, I guess it makes sense because guys have the most problems. Women are just, good at conversation, better at
I don't agree
emotional
with
things.
that.
Okay, so I'm curious, like,
No.
how is matchmaking? How are these things different, if at all, for women and men? And maybe what are some like common misconceptions? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I'll let you respond.
I think that honestly, one of the things that's actually really surprising is the way that men and women are similar, not different, when it comes to dating. And by that, I mean that, like, this is a total cliche, but like, we'll have women where they'll go on a date and they will feel really nervous and vulnerable and almost maybe protective. Like maybe there's a protective element there where like they're going to go meet this person they're really excited about and there's just this vulnerability coming up for them. And what I find so often is that women do not think men get nervous. Like women just don't think that it's this shared experience. They assume that they're kind of the vulnerable ones and that men are sort of emotionally unavailable and just out of reach and not emotionally in touch. And I actually don't think that's always the case. I think that oftentimes men are coming to that first date just as nervous and sometimes expected to do a little bit more of like the initiating. Maybe they're the one who has to ask the girl out. They pick up the check. Maybe there's sort of this quiet social rule or social expectation that they'll be the one to follow up. And I think there's maybe not a lot of credit given to men for how vulnerable that is. And I think because women can feel like they're maybe there is like almost an assumption that they're the more emotionally ready. And so I think it leaves men sort of sometimes in this tough spot where like maybe they also are feeling vulnerable, but they have to kind of overcome that to get to the woman and show, no, yeah, I'm serious about a relationship. And it's just a tough thing to do. But I will say that I think dating as a woman in your 30s, unfortunately, it can be harder, I think, versus for men for no other reason than just the biological clock part. And even if they're not thinking about it, sometimes other people are thinking about it. And so it doesn't need to dominate your dating experience that you're in your 30s and a woman and maybe want children. But just acknowledging from my experience that it can have an impact and that it can just complicate things a little bit more, where it's like, how early do I bring up that I am pretty serious about kids? You know, I'm 33 and I want kids and maybe I want two of them. And that's not really great first date conversation. It's pretty stressful to be like, so when do you want children? You know, like we've just
Is
sat down
that
for
is that not
coffee.
good? Is that not good if you're getting matchmaked? Like,
So
presumably you have
the goal
goals.
of matchmaking is that you kind of deal with all of that up front so that you
Ah,
don't have to have these like kind of tough conversations. I my hope for everybody is that they can go on a first date and that they've already done enough due diligence that the purpose of the date is really just like, can we enjoy each other's company? Because otherwise, I think some of that other stuff can just add pressure, and pressure doesn't always put people in the best place to have fun and hang loose and to like show who they really authentically are.
right. Do you have any other things you'd like to tell us about the lovely impact of matchmaking, or shall we move on to shuffle?
I would love to talk to Shuffle about Shuffle, and I think there's some overlap. I don't know if you saw Time Magazine just released an article about Gen Z and the use of dating apps. And I was thinking about this conversation and just thinking about how, yeah, there's a load we could talk about there. But dating apps are essentially, whether it's stock prices, consumer satisfaction, all of the data that we have available, dating apps are not looking great right now. And people aren't super happy with them. And so they really are seeking some kind of alternative and they really want that face to face experience.
Okay, so yes. Um, is all of your work typically face to face, or do you arrange video calls or online meetups or anything?
That's a good question. Yeah, I we find that typically a client who's paying matchmaking services typically cost quite a bit. And so they usually prefer an in-person date because I think they feel like it provides a little bit more value on the introduction. But there's plenty of people who either prefer starting with a video call or they're open to dating people who are outside of their city, which would kind of necessitate the need for something, some kind of preliminary mechanism of meeting them because you don't want to wait too long between when we're sort of engaging with a match and when we're conducting the introduction. The world of dating can move really quickly. So someone could be single one week and then not single the next. As matchmakers, we may encourage the client, hey, maybe just like hop on the video call because you never know, like things can change. Equally, I think we do tend to prefer an in-person introduction because I think that's what the client usually prefers.
Right. And I'm scared I'm boxing you into all these matchmaking talks, and it is high end, right? So I'm curious kind of how it applies to the average person, and maybe how does like what you've learned about dating apply to a shuffle participant, either at our events or otherwise, or maybe like how would you recommend to friends who maybe aren't in the matchmaking ecosystem but who are
Yes.
more interested in like lower cost ways to date, like what should someone's dating strategy and set of activities be, and where might like a shuffle speed dating event fit in, where do the apps fit in, um, does it
Yep.
depend on each person, like what is your friend consultant hat say?
Yes, like if I was going to just tell somebody who maybe didn't want to hire a matchmaker who couldn't afford one, and even I think this advice applies to everybody. Like even people who use matchmakers might go to one of your events or they might be on a dating app. So in general, I think it's really good to have like a multi-prong approach to dating. And I think as part of that, some of what you're doing shouldn't be focused exclusively on dating. And part of that is because the social skills required to meet people and engage with them and get to know them are the same whether or not you're meeting someone for a date or whether or not you're networking. And regardless, this kind of seems counterintuitive, but like dating is a skill, like socializing is a skill, rapport building, connecting, sort of showing vulnerability, like those are all skills. Even flirting is a skill. And so, first, I would encourage people to just make friends. And I mean like genuinely make friends. I don't mean like make friends and then be like, is this person someone I should take on a date? Maybe a little bit, but I mean like genuinely just try to grow your network and alleviate some of that pressure to just be connecting with people for dating purposes. I think secondly is I would get not just one, but maybe a couple friends, maybe your mom, maybe someone you trust to look at your dating app profile. I would say that something like 70 to 80% of the dating app profiles that I see, I would make big changes to.
Oh my gosh. Here we go.
Yeah.
I'm
And
sending you.
it's,
I'm sending you
yeah,
mine.
I could absolutely look at your dating app profile, but I think a big part of that is one, photos. I know that's so cliche, but it makes the biggest difference. And that means that they're up to date. You can really fully clearly see your face, and also that they show like a little bit of personality. You don't just want a LinkedIn headshot because it can feel sterile and it doesn't really give much of who you are. And so I think a good dating app profile, not just photos, but also try to think about when you're writing your bio, almost like it's a job listing and you're seeking candidates who are applying for that job. What sorts of things could you put in your dating app profile that would attract the right people and would maybe, if the wrong people are seeing it, they're going to swipe the other way. So I think optimizing it, not just about, let me give a full picture of myself, because you want to do that and you want it to be authentic and genuine, but you also want to think about like, what sort of hooks are you giving the other person? What sort of things are you offering them to either pick up on and message you like, hey, that was really funny. But yeah, maybe even just leaving like traces of like some of what your values are, some of what you like to do. And so I think that was like a really broad question, but alleviate
Yeah.
some of the pressure, network your life away, just make some friends because you might meet someone through your friends anyway, and optimize your dating profile because I know we're all trying to do that, but maybe get outside opinions because we're not the best at sort of objectively analyzing ourselves and how we're presenting.
I totally agree with everything you said. I think outside opinions have changed my life because at some point I knew it was correct to do so. And my cousin and some female friends and my sister are people I kind of half listen to, but over time they keep telling me and then they all agree like XYZ is wrong and bad. And it took me a few years, but I eventually realized they're just totally right. And I'm so stupid and I should have gotten a haircut ages ago. But the repeated thing of like getting
Yeah.
feedback and advice and being open-minded over time, even if you absorb it little by little, I think
Yeah.
changes you. And I also love what you said about being pointy or edgy in some way with the hooks, because I went to this event in Seattle. It was like Pitch Your Friend night, which was the most awesome event. But the one
That is
complaint
so
that I
cool.
had, it was so much fun and it was better than all the other speed dating events, especially Seattle has this like large, overly male to female ratio in all these meetup type situations.
Interesting. Yeah.
In my experience, but this event was like something that women were like pretty into, and so there's a much more equal ratio. But people were all men and women. Everyone was pitching their friends, and they were not pointy enough. Like the most interesting thing was some guy had a boat, and they kept talking about his boat, and it was like okay, cool. But everyone else is like, oh, I ski and I run marathons and I like to, drink a beer on a Sunday. It was very confusing, like all these different hobbies. Like
Yeah.
people, like if you're going to be a bookworm, like just be a bookworm. Like,
And even like, I think giving people more, almost like an open-ended question. So like, part of my job as a matchmaker wasn't just to source people and pitch them to my client. It was also to pitch my client and to sell them to these matches who are like their dream people, which was not easy because I have to sell them right, essentially, to get them in the door. And it's about like making those things just like a better story. Like it's funny, like you say the boat thing. I remember there was this guy, Steve, and Steve was like just the total package. I sent him on so many dates because he was such a good guy. And he always told this story about his boat sinking, and it was about like him getting to the marina and he's like, oh Jesus Christ, and the boat's in the water, and he like calls his son, and it's this really funny story where you learn that one, Steve is like a good sport, like boats sinking in the marina and he's like cracking up about it. Two, he's really close with his kids. Three, he like bought another boat right afterwards, he's like, and it's just giving you some stuff, it's like and you're getting some of his personality in. So I think any way that you can kind of channel some of that, some of like not just being cliche, but like a little bit of like your person, yeah, just who you are and like the way that you show up to these situations. Or yeah, it's so tough. Dating is so hard. So I give people a lot of credit because it's tough to show up and be vulnerable and authentic, and to not feel like you have to refine and kind of script yourself.
Yeah. So how does dating vary, do you think, by city and or country?
That's such an interesting question. It definitely was something that came up in my work at Macklin because I matchmaked both in Europe and in the US and like across the US. And I think one thing that's interesting is that some people from certain locations are sometimes not super compatible, which is just interesting. And of course, these are like sweeping generalizations. But when during COVID, all these New Yorkers started moving to Florida, and all of the New Yorkers were like, oh my goodness, I cannot date Floridians. Like, this is just not good. Like, where are the other New York transplants? And like New York and LA sometimes mesh as well, but sometimes not at all. And what they'll often say about each other is like New Yorkers are mean and honest, and LA people are nice, but they're kind of fake and flaky, which again, sweeping generalizations, but it's just funny to see these things come up over time. And also, British men tend to be slightly more traditional. So at Macklin, we arrange all of the introductions, but we found that the UK clients they wanted to be more involved because they felt like it was the respectful thing to do. They felt like it was the more gentleman-y thing to do. A lot of my clients were in New York. We're like optimizing for time always. So they're like, yeah, no, schedule this. Like, I'm good. You got it. Like, I'll show up at the date and time. So that was kind of funny to see that the UK team maybe had people who leaned a little bit more traditional in terms of how they wanted to approach setting up the date. And New York was like time optimization, like book it in my schedule. I think everyone's so career oriented there. Definitely, I think people date a little bit differently depending on where they live.
What are the things that block people that aside from like not treating it analytically, and like you've already given a ton of advice about, the way you set up a profile, the way you sell yourself, like using a variety of things, being out there socially. Are there things that like, what is a key nugget that most people miss?
I've got a good one. I find, and this is like my own term, so I hope it makes sense to you, but I find that people do this thing sometimes, especially very early on in dating, where they play what I call like emotional chicken, where it's kind of like, who's gonna tell the other one that we like each other first? And like, I'm going to kind of keep my cards close to my chest until the other person tells me, but that other person is also kind of waiting for you to tell them. And then we're both sort of sitting here with feelings and trying to read the other person and maybe trying to play a little bit hard to get. And it really just doesn't get anybody where they want to go. And so I think a common thing that I see is people will assume that communicating that you like someone is chasing them. And I don't think those are the same things. I think chasing is when somebody has expressed to you or shown you through their actions that they're not interested and that they're not showing up. Communicating is just coming away from a first date and being the first one to say, hey, I really liked you. you were really cute and I would love to see you again. And when are you free? When do you want to grab dinner again? And people will sort of, in a way to protect themselves, refrain from doing those things. And I think there are so many connections that would be furthered and could have real potential if people just let themselves, you don't have to chase, but just let themselves be the first one to make the move. Like women too, like it can go so far for a woman to just put out there, I'm actually kind of into you. Yeah, no, I would like to see you again. Um, so yeah, just letting the guard down a little bit. You don't have to give it all away. You don't have to sort of jump in and be like, let's make things official. But I think just early on communicating, yeah, actually I'm into this. It can be big for people. I actually have a really cute story. I'll be quick, but I had this client who was just an awesome guy, like Harvard graduate, titan of industry, had spent like many years as a Marine in the military. And he was open to meeting people anywhere because he traveled all the time for work. And he connected with this girl over FaceTime who was so lovely. She was in London, he was in California. They meet for this FaceTime call. And he follows up with me after, and he's like, she was amazing. I really, really liked her, but she hasn't gotten back to my text. And I thought that was kind of funny because we had like a nice chat, and I'm just a little confused about it. And I talked to her on the phone, and she said, I am so blown away by him. And I was so nervous on the date because he was so wonderful that I think I've just made a complete fool of myself. And I talked way too much, and I'm embarrassed. And I've decided I'm just going to like, he's clearly just being polite, and I'm just going to like let it go. And they ended up dating for 2 years because I was like, no, girl, he really likes you. And if I wasn't there to just like whisper in her ear, like, you can lean in here, it's safe, you can trust him, they would have missed that. And so I think there's some, take your chances in the right places in the right times. If the guy has kind of proven himself to be unreliable, you can pull back. I get that. There's reasons for us to be self-protective, but I think especially early on, you've got nothing to lose. Like, throw it out there, let them know that you're into them, and it could really work out for you.
Yeah. Is that how different is that for men and women? I feel like or any whatever gender, like how do the genders work there? Because my impression is that if a woman tells a guy that she likes him, it just opens the door for infatuation, like maybe prematurely, and the guys just glom on. And at least I'm very expressive, so. And Latin American people, I lived in Ecuador, and
Yeah.
they seem to like the flowers on the first date. And maybe some women in the US are like, whoa, like, why are you bringing me chocolates? We've never even met. Like, it's kind of scary.
It's so funny because I think I often see that women feel really scared to be vulnerable. Like there's this fear, if I let him know, almost like that cool girl thing where like I just need to be super chill and then he'll come to me. And so I find that a lot of women will hold their feelings close to their chest because they're assuming, kind of like I said, they're assuming that they're not the men aren't sharing their vulnerability. They're not kind of in the same bucket. But I think it's men and women deal with things so they actually have a lot of similarities, I guess is my point. Like I think um, men also, how do I want to put this? Like men also really struggle to be vulnerable. They both do. I don't know. I don't know. It's hard for me to piece out what the differences are with gender because I've seen so much variation. There hasn't been like a broad stroke I feel like I can paint. And it's also funny because some of what I'm thinking about, like it might just be New Yorkers. New York is like such a specific culture, and the way that people date is so specific. Many, many, many people don't have kids until their 40s, 50s. And that's such an outlier for the rest of the country. And I think it informs so much of how they're dating otherwise, is that professional component is so big in their lives. But yeah, I don't even know if I answered that question, Andy. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's fine.
It's a hard one.
Yeah, I mean, there's no right answer, right? I guess that's one more question I have, and then we can probably like wrap up, or if you have questions for me. But I'm curious. I feel like when I go on dates from the apps, they're less likely to lead to anything compared to meeting people at a party, and it's just kind of the whole process is like very frustrating. Is it art versus science? Does it only take one? There's obviously things you can do in your control, but then like,
Yes. Yeah, so it's interesting because earlier I was sort of advocating for taking an analytical approach, but that really only gets you so far. We've had clients show up with literal PowerPoint spreadsheets about what makes a good partner, and that is so limiting, and also just not a good method for feeling out who makes a good partner, because kind of like what you said, um, people can totally redefine what makes a good partner in one date. There are people who you've never met who go against everything in many ways that you've described, what you're looking for, but who could also make a wonderful, wonderful partner for you. So I think keeping yourself open-minded and kind of incorporating like, the idea of like, is it science or is it art? I think it really is a mix of both. I really think it's a marriage of both. I think you need to both have the wherewithal and the intention and sort of um, you just need to have the wherewithal to kind of pull yourself out of the emotional experience of dating and ask yourself if it's going to get you where you want to go. And there are times where you don't need to ask that. But if you're looking for marriage and kids, you want to be thinking about, is this potential partner going to are we going to be in a healthy long-term relationship like I have it envisioned in my head? There are other times where I think you need to tap into your body. So it's almost like sometimes you need to have more of an analytical framework, and not let emotion drive the ship. But other times I think you do need to really check in with your intuition. And a big thing with that is, how does this person make you feel? There are a lot of people who would say, I would love to see that guy again. But when you ask him, how does he make you feel? They might say, actually, I felt kind of insecure and uneasy. And I sort of like questioned my worth after our date. But there's something validating there for them, something kind of motivating there for them, or they want to chase after that. And so it's almost like using your emotions, asking yourself almost like your emotional truth, and then using that to sort of guide more of the analytical decision making that you might be making.
This was or I remember now, I originally asked this question kind of thinking in my head, like, what percent of date coaching and like successful dating is therapy? And it sounds like a fairly large amount.
Yeah. I think therapy, coaching, it's all really just bringing in someone else so that you're not doing it alone, and so that we all are limited in what we're able to see about ourselves. We're so biased, and even like our past experiences color so much of how we look at our dating experiences, and it just might not be accurate. Um, we write so many crazy stories. Like, I've had clients go on a first date and like the guy's shirt was wrinkly and they're like, well, clearly he's irresponsible. And, but it's crazy. Like, we all make, Andy's like, it's me. No, but I think we all make a little, like these little assumptions. And so having someone else there to just pick your brain, I think it can be so helpful.